You know how sometimes you hear a little something that makes you think, huh, that's not what I learned in school. Today, we're going down a rabbit hole into one of those areas, a proposed lost civilization called Tartaria. It's something that, well, it doesn't really pop up in mainstream history.
And what's interesting from the get-go is why the idea of a hidden history is so compelling to so many people. We're constantly finding new pieces of the past, sure, but this theory suggests something else. A deliberate scrubbing of the record on a massive global scale.
Exactly. Our goal today is to dig into the claims about Tartaria based on what we've got here. We want to see what's presented as, evidence and get a feel for why some people believe this civilization was intentionally forgotten.
Okay.
We're looking at a document that lays out the case for Tartaria's existence and its supposed destruction, touching on everything from old maps to, weird architecture and claims of lost technology.
A lot to unpack there.
Definitely. Okay, so where do we even begin with this?
Well, the foundation of the Tartaria idea is that it wasn't just a myth, it was real, a widespread country. The document we're looking at points to the fact that Tartary is actually on maps from the 18th century, complete with its own flag government,
right,
covering huge swaths of the globe.
Right. And it wasn't just one big blob on the map either, was it? The document mentions different regions within Tartary, Great Tartary, Muscovite Tartary, Chinese Tartary, all provinces, kind of, within a larger entity.
Yeah, subdivisions.
It even brings up the 1771 Encyclopedia Britannica, which does describe Tartary as this massive area in northern Asia.
Yeah.
So the starting point is this historical cartographic presence. It was on the maps.
Right, and the immediate question that jumps out is, how could a country of that apparent size and significance seemingly just vanish from our later historical understanding? It really prompts you to think about how historical narratives get constructed, and what might lead to the disappearance or marginalization of entire civilizations in the popular record.
Then the document brings up potential physical evidence, like these Tartaria tablets found in Romania. They're old clay tablets with markings. And some propose these could be an early form of Tartarian writing.
Writing? That's significant.
Yeah, but the document itself acknowledges that these markings could be interpreted in various ways. Maybe they're just symbols or even decorative.
Okay.
But they're presented as a potential clue, you see.
Well, the implication is significant. If these markings were actually part of a written language associated with a distinct Tartarian culture, well, that would suggest a certain level of societal complexity. It could potentially push back the timeline of this civilization quite a bit.
True.
But it's important to note the interpretation of these tablets is still debated by archaeologists. A definitive link to a global Tartarian empire is pretty far from established.
Okay. Now, this is where things get really visually interesting. The architecture. The theory argues that a lot of the grand, ornate buildings we see around the world, the ones often categorized under styles like Moorish Revival or Neoclassical, that kind of thing.
Impressive structures.
They're saying those are actually leftovers from this Tartarian civilization. The document suggests these labels, these style names, are just a way of hiding the true origins and maybe the purpose of these structures.
And why do you think that idea resonates with people so much, this idea of mislabeled history?
Well, the idea of a fake history, as the document calls it, seems to play a big role. It taps into this suspicion, maybe a distrust, that our understanding of the past has been deliberately shaped or, manipulated.
All right, the narrative control idea.
Yeah. The theory posits that architectural elements like columns, arches, stained glass, domes, they weren't just for looks. They were fundamental to Tartarian technology and how their society functioned.
And it goes a step further, doesn't it? Even suggesting that old photographs have been altered.
Yeah. The idea that things like spires were digitally removed or crosses added to images later to support this revised history, that's quite a claim about manipulating visual records.
It is. And this is a common thread you find in many alternative history theories, this deep distrust of mainstream narratives and institutions. By suggesting a systematic alteration of both physical structures and their photographic representation, the theory aims to undermine the credibility of conventional historical accounts. It presents itself as uncovering a hidden truth.
Okay, so beyond the impressive buildings, the document claims the Tartarians had some seriously advanced technology. Supposedly even more sophisticated than what we have today. They mention eternal geopolymer concrete that supposedly gets stronger over time. What can you tell us about that concept? Is that even a real thing?
Well, geopolymer concrete is a real area of modern research. People are exploring it for more sustainable building materials. It does have some interesting properties, but the claim that the Tartarians possessed an eternal version far superior to anything we can produce today, that's speculative. There's really no physical evidence we know of to support such a widespread and advanced use of this material by a lost civilization.
Okay. Then we get into the really out there stuff. Free atmospheric energy. The theory suggests the Tartarians could just tap into this energy using these iron and glass structures with domes and metal points, distributing it wirelessly.
Wirelessly?
Yeah, and the argument is that this technology was deliberately suppressed, hidden, and replaced with wired systems basically for profit. What's the underlying appeal of this idea, the suppressed tech?
Oh, the allure of clean, limitless energy is powerful, isn't it? The idea that such a technology existed in the past and was deliberately hidden. It connects to frustrations with current energy systems, maybe a longing for a simpler, more equitable tech paradigm.
Sure, I get that.
However, from a scientific standpoint, there's just no evidence of a widely implemented and then successfully hidden free energy technology in the historical period attributed to Tartaria.
But the document doesn't stop at just energy. It lists a whole bunch of impossible engineering feats supposedly achieved by the Tartarians. Things like the vast canal systems in the USA, the Great Wall of China, underground networks, even the tunnels beneath Washington, D.C.
Wow. Okay.
When we look at these massive projects, what's the standard historical understanding of where they came from?
Generally, these projects have pretty well-documented histories, often spanning decades, sometimes centuries. They involve various cultures, different technologies available at the time, massive labor forces. While the scale of some of these undertakings is certainly impressive, absolutely, and required significant engineering knowledge for their time, we have archaeological evidence, historical records, and a scientific understanding of the methods and resources used. Attributing them all to a single, vanished civilization without compelling evidence kind of overlooks the specific historical contexts.
Right, it ignores the contributions of all the diverse groups actually involved.
Precisely.
And then there's the magnificent worldwide Tartarian architecture again. We're talking about those columns, the stained glass, the domes that are supposedly symbols of
Oh, no.
and the grand arches. The claim is these aren't just old buildings, they're remnants of a unified global culture, and now they're often occupied by the elite, like private residences. What does architectural history tell us about how these styles actually spread?
Well, architectural styles have always traveled. They get adapted across cultures and time periods through things like trade, migration, the sharing of ideas. It's constant flow. Similarities in architectural elements can often be explained by these processes: cultural exchange, adopting successful designs.
Okay.
The claim that these buildings exclusively house the elite is also a bit of a broad generalization. It doesn't really account for the diverse uses and ownership of historical buildings around the world.
And the dome thing.
As for the dome as a symbol of Om, that interpretation seems very specific to this theory. It doesn't really align with mainstream architectural symbolism across different cultures.
Gotcha. Finally, in this section, we have the Great Tartary Railway train systems. The document talks about them being the origin of transcontinental railways, the first trains globally, even mentioning luxurious travel and widespread mail order by rail incredibly early, like 1895.
That early, mail order by rail.
Yeah. What's the established timeline of railway development? Because that sounds fast.
It does. The history of railway development is actually quite well recorded. We see clear advancements in technology over time, key inventors, the gradual expansion of networks throughout the 19th century. While rail travel certainly transformed society, no doubt about it, attributing its origins and that early widespread adoption, especially with the luxurious travel and mail order timelines suggested here, it contradicts the established historical records and the documented pace of technological advancements.
Okay. So if this advanced civilization existed, what supposedly happened to it? What led to its downfall? The document presents a rather dramatic scenario. The Tartarian people were destroyed when the NWO, this shadowy New World Order, figured out how to weaponize their technology, potentially even misusing healing technology.
Weaponized healing tech. Wow. What's the typical narrative around societal collapse in historical studies? How do civilizations usually fall apart?
Well, societal collapse is a really complex phenomenon. Historians and archaeologists study it across various disciplines. Historically, civilizations have declined or disappeared, due to a whole multitude of factors, environmental changes, internal conflict, economic instability, disease, external pressures like invasions.
Right, usually a combination of things.
Exactly. The idea of a single, deliberate act of technological destruction by a secret organization leading to the complete erasure of a global civilization, that's a very specific and frankly unusual proposition compared to the more nuanced understandings of historical collapses we generally work with.
And the evidence cited for this destruction. The document mentions millions of bones buried under cities and huge mental institutions with crematories as possible signs of this mass elimination. How do historians typically interpret findings like mass graves or the history of asylums?
Archaeological findings of human remains are usually analyzed very carefully within their specific historical and geographical contexts. Mass graves, for instance, can be the result of warfare, epidemics, natural disasters, lots of things.
Not necessarily a single secret purge.
Right. Similarly, the history of mental health institutions reflects evolving social attitudes and medical practices, often marked by periods of poor understanding and, unfortunately, inhumane treatment. Attributing these findings directly and solely to the systematic extermination of a specific lost population requires very clear, very direct evidence linking them to that event and that population, which isn't presented here.
Okay. Now we get into the more conspiratorial layers. The idea of a historical reset. The theory suggests that this New World Order rewrote history sometime between the mid-1800s and maybe the 1930s. Figures like Rockefeller and the Rothschilds supposedly played key roles.
And this rewriting supposedly involved pushing theories like the Big Bang and evolution to deliberately mislead us.
Yeah, that's the claim. What's the general perspective on the historicity of scientific theories like those?
Well, scientific theories like the Big Bang and evolution aren't just pulled out of thin air. They're developed and refined through rigorous processes, observation, experimentation, peer review. It takes time and evidence. They represent our current best understanding of the natural world based on a vast body of evidence from many different fields.
So the idea that these well-established scientific frameworks were simply fabricated as part of some historical manipulation, that's a significant departure from how science actually operates and evolves.
And it's not just scientific theories targeted. The document also points fingers at the Vatican and the Jesuits, suggesting they were involved in this historical revision and even control major spy agencies today.
Right. It expands the scope of the alleged conspiracy quite a bit. Which is common.
It seems like it.
Yeah. Broad conspiracy theories often involve multiple powerful entities, governments, religious groups, financiers, all working together in secret towards some hidden goal. This kind of narrative can be appealing because it offers a seemingly simple explanation for complex and sometimes unsettling historical events or societal problems.
A single cause for everything.
Kind of. But historical analysis typically focuses on the actions of specific individuals and institutions within their particular historical contexts, looking at motivations, documented actions, consequences, rather than attributing huge events to the coordinated actions of vast, hidden, unverifiable organizations.
This all culminates in the concept of fake history, doesn't it? The idea that much of what we're taught is just a lie, requiring us to have a tabula rasa, a blank slate in our minds to truly grasp the real past.
Yes. But what are the challenges in completely disregarding existing historical knowledge like that?
Well, while critical thinking and a willingness to question established narratives are absolutely crucial for historical understanding, we should always question.
Absolutely.
Completely discarding existing historical frameworks means losing access to a vast amount of well-documented information, archaeological findings, decades, centuries of scholarly analysis. You can't just throw it all out.
You need something to build on or react again.
Exactly. Building new understanding of the past requires engaging with the existing evidence, critiquing it, reinterpreting it maybe, but not simply erasing it wholesale.
The document even proposes that major historical events, we all know, the fall of Troy, the fall of the Roman Empire, even World War I, were actually just different accounts of the defeat of this great Tartaria.
Wow. That's a pretty radical reinterpretation of some major historical turning points.
It is. This interpretation requires a significant rethinking, a complete overhaul of the established timelines, the causes, the consequences of these huge historical events. It often means disregarding the specific evidence and analyses associated with each one.
And to explain the timeline issues this creates, the theory introduces the idea that historical events were deliberately misdated, even moved around geographically.
Moved. Geographically.
Yeah, creating these phantom copies in our history books, supposedly orchestrated by figures like the chronologist Joseph Justus Scaliger. What's the mainstream understanding of how we date history?
Historical chronology isn't arbitrary. It's built upon a variety of dating methods, analyzing texts, archaeology, tree rings, dendrochronology, radiocarbon dating, many others.
Right, multiple lines of evidence.
Exactly. While there can be debates and refinements in dating specific events, especially very ancient ones, the overall framework of ancient and more recent history is pretty robust. It's supported by multiple independent lines of evidence converging. The idea of a deliberate, widespread manipulation of this entire chronological framework is not supported by the evidence we have and is generally considered a fringe theory, often called new chronology.
Interestingly, the document even mentions that Wikipedia dismisses this new chronology as a pseudo-historical Russian conspiracy theory. So it acknowledges the mainstream pushback.
Yes, and it's important for anyone exploring these alternative historical frameworks to be aware of that critical reception and the reasons behind the skepticism within the academic community. It helps provide context.
Okay, finally, under the destruction section, we have the mud floods. The idea of some kind of global mudslide event that buried the lower levels of Tartarian buildings worldwide. What's the geological evidence for something like that, a global mud flood?
Well, localized flooding and sedimentation are very well understood geological processes. They happen. But the concept of a global mud flood event that significantly altered the architectural landscape on a worldwide scale, it lacks widespread geological evidence. There's no layer of mud consistent across the globe from a single event like that.
So how do they explain buildings looking buried?
Explanations for seemingly buried lower levels of buildings typically involve more mundane factors, things like street levels rising over centuries of rebuilding in cities, deliberate backfilling when landscapes changed, or localized flooding events specific to a region, not usually a single global cataclysm.
Okay, so if these Tartarian remnants are supposedly all around us, where are we supposed to see them? The document points to many existing buildings worldwide, now attributed to various architectural styles, as being originally Tartarian. So the argument is we're just misattributing these structures.
That's the core of the architectural claim, yes, that what we understand as distinct architectural styles, neoclassical, Gothic revival, Moorish revival, etc., are actually just variations or later adaptations of original Tartarian designs. This perspective requires a complete re-examination of the historical context, the construction methods, the cultural influences associated with countless buildings across the globe. It's a huge undertaking.
Then there are star forts, those fortifications with distinctive, geometric, star-like shapes. The theory proposes they weren't just for defense, but also for things like energy harvesting or even healing. It draws a connection to the geometric patterns in Dr. Emoto's water experiment.
Water experiments.
Yeah, and the document claims a huge number of these were built in the U.S. alone in the 1850s. What's the established understanding of star forts? What were they really for?
Star forts, or bastion forts, were primarily designed as defensive structures, specifically against cannon fire, which became dominant in warfare. Their geometric shape was strategically advantageous. It provided overlapping fields of fire and minimized dead angles where attackers could hide.
Makes sense defensively.
Right. While their construction often involved very skilled engineering for the time, there's no historical or architectural evidence to support an energy harvesting or healing function.
And the Emoto connection.
The comparison to Dr. Emoto's work on water crystals, while visually interesting perhaps, doesn't establish any scientific link to the architectural principles or the historical use of these forts. It's more of a visual analogy.
What about the number built in the U.S.?
As for the claim of a huge number built in the U.S., specifically in the 1850s, that would need careful verification against historical records of military construction from that period.
Got it. The Berlin Tiergarten, the zoo there, is presented as a possible Tartarian Noah's Ark, supposedly designed to preserve species using atmospheric energy after some global disaster.
Yeah.
That's a pretty specific interpretation of a city zoo.
It is rather specific, isn't it? While the Berlin Zoo is indeed a significant and old zoological institution, interpreting it as a Tartarian Noah's Ark powered by atmospheric energy, well, it lacks any historical or scientific basis that I'm aware of. The zoo's establishment happened in the 19th century, and it aligns with the broader development of zoological gardens during that era, which were driven by scientific curiosity, colonialism, and early conservation efforts.
Okay. Shifting to more esoteric ideas now, the document talks about the healing resonance of churches and the potential cymatic healing power of sound. like sound from choirs and pipe organs influenced by the architecture itself, could heal people.
Cymimetics. That's the study of visible sound and vibration. What's the relationship between sound architecture and well-being in our general understanding?
Well, the way sound interacts with architectural spaces, acoustics can certainly influence our sensory experience. It can have psychological effects, create feelings of awe or peace.
Sure, think of a cathedral's echo.
Exactly. There's growing interest in the relationship between music, acoustics, and well-being in fields like music therapy and architectural design.
However, attributing the design of historical churches specifically to an intentional application of cymatics by a lost Tartarian civilization without any concrete evidence that they knew about or applied this field, that's a significant interpretive leap.
Then we have magnetricity.
Magnetricity.
Yeah, the idea that copper domes and coils in buildings worldwide, often thought of as temples or just decorative, are actually used to gather atmospheric energy. Places like Copper Harbor, Michigan, and copper mines in California are mentioned as sources for all this copper. How does this idea align with our understanding of electricity and magnetism?
The principles of electromagnetism are very well established in modern science. We understand how electricity and magnetism work and interact. While copper is an excellent conductor of electricity, absolutely, the idea of magnetricity as some distinct form of atmospheric energy harnessed by these architectural features in the way described, it just doesn't align with our current scientific understanding.
And the copper mines.
Copper mining was indeed significant in places like Michigan and California, yes. But the copper produced was used for a huge variety of known industrial and technological purposes. Wiring, plumbing, machinery, coinage.
Right, not necessarily secret energy devices.
Not based on the evidence we have.
We also have the idea of free energy wireless poles and lamps, suggesting that energy was once transmitted wirelessly and that our current wired systems are actually a step backward, maybe deliberately so.
Okay. What's the actual historical progression of energy distribution technologies that we know of?
The development of energy distribution has a pretty well-documented history. It started with very localized sources like candles, oil lamps, gas lamps.
Brought to light where you needed it.
Then came the harnessing and transmission of electricity, crucially through wires. That was the big leap in the late 19th century.
Well, wireless energy transfer is a developing technology today. We have phone chargers and things. The historical record just doesn't support the idea of a widespread functional wireless energy system preceding wired electricity on a large scale. Tesla experimented, but it wasn't implemented globally.
The round Druid energy towers of Ireland are also brought up, presented as potential magnetic antenna for energy harvesting by this lost civilization.
Okay, the Irish round towers. What's the current archaeological understanding of what those towers are actually for?
Well, the exact purpose of Irish round towers is still a subject of some debate among archaeologists, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Theories range from defensive structures, places to retreat during raids, to bell towers associated with monasteries, or even storage facilities.
While some researchers have proposed connections to magnetic fields or agricultural practices, these remain speculative ideas. They're not the consensus view within the archaeological community.
And finally, in terms of evidence, we have Tartarian power stations, supposedly using granite and geopolymer concrete linked to structures like obelisks, minarets, and pinnacles. The Great Pyramid of Giza and the huge granite boxes in the Serapeum in Egypt are mentioned as examples of impossible engineering related to energy storage.
Right, the usual suspects for impossible ancient tech.
And also pyramids found all over the world, China, Bosnia, Russia. How does mainstream archaeology view these structures?
The Great Pyramid and the Serapeum are, without doubt, remarkable feats of ancient Egyptian engineering. Their construction continues to be studied and debated. However, mainstream Egyptology offers explanations for their construction and purpose based on archaeological findings, hieroglyphic texts, religious beliefs, which don't involve a lost Tartarian civilization or energy storage functions.
What about pyramids elsewhere?
Similarly, while pyramid-like structures do exist in various parts of the world, they were built by different cultures at different times for very diverse reasons. Tombs, temples, ceremonial centers. Not necessarily as part of some unified Tartarian global energy network.
And the claim about Egyptian relics in the Grand Canyon.
Yes, that pops up sometimes. Claims of Egyptian relics found in the Grand Canyon lack verifiable archaeological support and are generally considered a hoax or misinterpretation dating back to early newspaper accounts.
Okay, now we're moving into the realm of alternative history and some really interesting interpretations. The document claims the USA was founded in 1776 by an American offshoot of the Mongol Empire, and that Moors are actually equated to Tartarians based on shared Gothic architecture.
Wow. That's a significantly different origin story for the United States than the one usually taught.
It really is.
This theory presents a major reinterpretation, linking the U.S. founding to a lost Tartarian Moorish heritage, suggesting continuity with the Mongol Empire. It challenges the conventional understanding of American history, the Revolution, the influences, and also the origins of its architectural styles, which are typically traced back to European influences, Palladianism, neoclassicism, etc.
The document also mentions the supposed erasure of black people's nobility from history. It links the word Nobel to Nebo, which is apparently Russian for heaven, and references the coat of arms of Coburg, Germany, which features a Moor's head.
Okay, that's connecting a few different dots there. What's the standard historical understanding of nobility and etymology?
Well, the concept of nobility varies hugely across different cultures and time periods. It's not a monolithic thing. And etymology, the study of word origins, can be really complex. Linking words across different languages like Nobel, Swedish Germanic, and Nebo, Slavic, requires careful linguistic analysis to show a real connection, not just a sound similarity.
Right.
The connections made here between those words and the Coburg coat of arms, while intriguing, would need some robust historical and linguistic evidence to be considered credible within mainstream scholarship. The Moor's head symbol itself has its own complex history in European heraldry.
The document also touches on the alleged mistreatment of Native Indians and suggests a rewriting of history that supposedly focuses only on interactions between white and black people, ignoring other dynamics. This brings up some important aspects of how history is written in the Americas.
It's certainly true that historical narratives of colonialism in the Americas have often been oversimplified. They have sometimes marginalized or completely misrepresented the experiences and interactions of various indigenous groups, as well as people of African descent. A more nuanced understanding of these incredibly complex historical interactions involving many different groups with their own agencies is an ongoing area of research and reevaluation among historians. There's always more to uncover.
The straw man legal concept is brought up. The claim is that it was created during the introduction of this New World Order. What exactly is the straw man theory as it's understood in these alternative circles?
The straw man theory, as it's often discussed in alternative legal and sometimes financial sovereign citizen type circles, proposes that when you're born, a separate legal entity, the straw man, often represented by your name in all caps, is created. And this entity, not the living person, is what the government and banks interact with, supposedly for various forms of control in financial transactions like debt. It's a complex interpretation of legal and financial systems.
That is not recognized within mainstream legal frameworks or courts at all.
Correct. We then have the classic interpretation of The Wizard of Oz, presented as an allegory for the post-bankruptcy United States and the shift away from the gold standard to fiat currency. This is a pretty well-known alternative interpretation, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Interpreting The Wizard of Oz as a political and economic allegory, particularly related to the populist movement, the gold standard debate, William Jennings Bryan, and the financial situation of the United States at the turn of the 20th century. That's been a popular interpretation in some circles for quite some time, not just related to Tartaria.
Right. Then the Great Reset of 1811-1812 and the New Madrid earthquakes are presented as a major cataclysmic event, possibly linked to the supposed Tartarian downfall. How significant were those earthquakes historically?
The New Madrid earthquakes were indeed a very significant series of seismic events in the early 19th century in the central United States. They were incredibly powerful, felt over a huge area, changed the course of the Mississippi River in places.
Wow.
They definitely had a noticeable impact on the region and the people living there. However, attributing them to a Great Reset connected specifically to the fall of Tartaria is an interpretation that goes way beyond the scientific understanding of earthquakes and their geological causes.
Okay. The legend of the island of California is mentioned populated by black women and griffins, ruled by a Queen Calafia, with a potential connection drawn to Wonder Woman mythology. That's an interesting mix of folklore and pop culture.
The legend of Queen Calafia is a fascinating part of the early mythology surrounding the exploration of the Americas. It comes from a 16th century Spanish romance novel, actually, and it did influence the naming of California. The potential connections people draw to later fictional characters like Wonder Woman and the Amazons highlight how ancient myths and legends can sometimes echo or resonate in modern narratives, intentionally or not.
The document also mentions Mirish, meaning African exploration of the New World before Columbus, and claims of black governors of California in the 1800s, suggesting a different historical narrative for the region. There's definitely been a growing recognition of the diverse historical actors in the Americas, beyond the standard European narrative.
Yes, absolutely. Ongoing historical research continues to uncover and highlight the contributions and presence of diverse groups, including people of African descent in the early history of the Americas, long before previously thought. It adds valuable nuance and complexity to our understanding of the past. The specific claim about black governors in 1800s California would need specific verification, though.
Right. Finally, the possibility of a universal Tartarian language is touched upon, a language that was later deliberately broken down into many dialects by the NWO. The idea of a lost universal language, a lingua franca, is something that pops up in various theories, isn't it? Like the Tower of Babel story.
It is a recurring theme. The actual development of languages and dialects is an incredibly complex process studied in linguistics. It's influenced by factors like migration, geographical isolation, social interaction, conquest, trade. Languages naturally change and diverge over time. The idea of a single, deliberately fragmented universal language is an interesting concept, but it doesn't align with the current scientific understanding of how languages actually evolve and diversify.
So to try and wrap this up, this deep dive into this document has laid out claims of a vast, technologically advanced civilization, Tartaria, supposedly existed relatively recently, had its history systematically erased by a shadowy New World Order, and left behind this global footprint of impressive architecture and impossible engineering.
The document posits a cataclysmic end, a deliberate manipulation of our entire history involving major institutions, financial, religious, scientific, and suggests surviving clues are hidden in plain sight in Gildings, maybe even in our myths and legends.
It's vital for you, the listener, to remember that the information we've explored today originates from sources presenting a very specific and, let's say, unconventional interpretation of history.
Absolutely. This perspective often challenges mainstream historical accounts head-on. It relies heavily on alternative interpretations of evidence, sometimes anecdotal claims, visual coincidences, and ultimately a grand unifying conspiracy narrative.
And that leads us to our final thought for you to consider. Given these claims, the advanced technology, the widespread architectural similarities pointed out, whether Tartarian or not, and the idea of historical revision, what other aspects of what we think we know about the past might deserve a closer, more critical look? Could it be that, as this document suggests at its core, what we are not taught is likely the truth of what really happened?
We encourage you to continue your own investigations. Explore these intriguing, though definitely unconventional, viewpoints if they capture your interest. But crucially, compare them rigorously with the established historical record, with archaeological findings, with scientific principles. The pursuit of knowledge often involves navigating very different perspectives, sometimes conflicting ones, and always, always critically evaluating the information we encounter. Where does the evidence actually lead?